Last week, we remembered that it was National Reconciliation Week. So we acknowledged First Nations peoples during that time. I'm here in Perth, Western Australia. The Wadjuk people of the Noongar Nation are the traditional owners of the lands and waters that we stand on and share. We acknowledge their unique cultural and spiritual connections to the lands and waters, honouring their wisdom, strength, and resilience as the world's oldest living cultures. We pay respects to the elders who play a vital role in fostering a fair and just society for all Australians. We acknowledge that parts of our post-colonisation history have contributed to the profound grief and loss experienced by First Nations peoples. We are committed to working alongside First Nations peoples to pursue justice, reconciliation, and mutual flourishing. We commit ourselves in prayer and practice to the lands of Australia and its peoples seeking reconciliation, unity, and equity. Today, we remember some inspirational Australians who have left this earth and world in the past 2 weeks. Neil Danaher, who fought for Richard Scollier, who brain surgery and melanoma, and Father Michael Tate. I'd like us to just think about those people and the impact that they've had on the lives of people in Australia in particular and around the world. When reading about Father Michael Tate, he was, as you would know, he was a Labor minister and he was also a priest. The Federal Labor Minister, Julie Collins, said that Father Tate was a devoted member of the Labor Party and he leaves behind a legacy of integrity, faith, and service to others. Tasmania's Archbishop Tony Ireland said, "In many ways, Father Michael was one of a kind, gifted intellectually, a powerful communicator, and an extraordinarily generous and faithful pastor who loved his people." How privileged was the Australian YCW to have, he was Senator Michael Tate then, open the World Council in 1991 in Adelaide. So we just remember remember him, and we remember Richard and Neil. So our prayer today is the International YCW prayer. Lord Jesus, I thank you for this day. I offer you all my work, my hopes, my joys and sorrows. Help me and all my fellow workers to think like you, to work with you, to live in you. Help me to love you with all my heart and serve you with all my strength. May your kingdom come in all our places of work, study, and leisure, and in all our homes. Give me courage to challenge what is wrong and keep me faithful to the ideals of the young Christian workers and the Cardine communities. May those who suffered for what is right and all who have died share the happiness of your kingdom forever. Amen. Over to you, Stefan.
Thanks very much, Gemma, and welcome to everybody. It's great to have so many people with us tonight to look at artificial intelligence in the light of what Pope Leo has said in his already famous first encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas. And tonight we thought we'd do our webinar in a bit of a different sort of a format, a kind of a CSsR format, in fact. We've invited Premesh Chandran from Malaysia, the founder of Malaysia Kini, an online newspaper there. Prem has had more than 25 years experience in the digital world already, and is now heavily involved also in working in the field of AI. So we invited Prem to join us to speak about some of the challenges, ethical challenges, the TCs that are coming up, springing up in that field of artificial intelligence, which, as we all know, is developing so quickly. And our friend Father Bruce Duncan will follow, giving a short introduction to what Pope Leo is saying in that encyclical. And he'll be followed by Stuart Moran from Melbourne, a biblical scholar, one of the few, I don't know if you're the only one, Stuart, but one of the few, at least who I know of, who's actually made a study of the book of Nehemiah that Pope Leo has now made famous around the world. So we begin tonight with Prem. I've known Prem for 25 years, since the time he began with Malaysia Kini. That was a huge struggle. We could do a whole webinar on that experience that Prem has had as co-founder of that newspaper, which has had such a huge impact in Malaysia. And I would say also his experience with media has had a huge impact well beyond Malaysia, across Asia as well, especially working with non-profits, NGOs who are trying to get experience and trying to make their presence felt in the digital world. But I think the easiest way is to hand directly over to you, Prem. Welcome. Thanks very much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Hi, Stefan. Thanks, Stefan. Hello, everybody. Yes, thanks for the nice introduction. I'm Premesh, based out in Kuala Lumpur. Very nice to be here. I've known Stefan for a long time, as Stefan mentioned. And I did a little bit of work with Catholic but Asian News out of Bangkok, a bit of a consultancy, so here and there. As Stefan mentioned, my background is essentially in media and technology, and the last couple of years I've been doing a lot of work in AI. I'm also a board member of the Malaysian Media Council, where we're also grappling a lot with how the AI is changing the media industry. So Stefan has asked me to speak a little bit about the kind of ethical challenges that we are facing in the field of AI. I won't speak for so long. I'll just speak briefly. I think, for me, the first real experience of AI, obviously we have had chat and things like that. But I don't know how many of you have watched a documentary called AlphaGo. Have any of you watched it? It's on Netflix and etc. It's a documentary about how an AI from DeepMind beat the world champion in Go. It's a very well done documentary. And what really surprised me was the anguish that was felt by the world champion. The world champion is a Korean player, and you follow him about, he comes into the match with DeepMind, a big egoistic world champion, never been beaten, this is going to be a piece of cake, taking on a computer. And as he starts to play the first game, he suddenly realizes, how good the computer is. And he starts to sweat, and he loses the first game, and he loses the series. And he goes on stage, and he apologizes, almost not just for himself, but for the entire humanity, for losing to a computer, right? So he's there, he's on stage, he bows, and he's in anguish because a computer has now surpassed the best Go player in the world, and will never look back. And the sense of, no matter how good he does, how much he trains, how well he tries to compete, he perhaps may never ever be able to beat a computer again. So, using the word as world champion, but you can't beat a computer. That's really tough. Well, I'm just gonna off this. So I think that was my first experience, understanding at a very deep level the impact of AI on humanity. I read with great delight Pope Leo's encyclical. I think it was very, very timely, very well appreciated coming from the Pope, from the Catholic Church. I think that he speaks very clearly and accurately about the dilemma we face today and how we need to move forward. Putting humanity as a central part of the discussion, and human well-being and human welfare and looking at AI and technology from that aspect, I think is the right way to do it. So I greatly applaud and appreciate Pope Leo for putting this out, and it's become a point of discussion even among those who are not of the Catholic faith. And I myself am not from the Catholic faith, but it's been a good learning for all of us. So I think it's a great contribution by the church on this. I think there are really two great dilemmas that we face and I confront. One is that with the development of this new technology and ability to do things, humanity and will become less central to the mode of productivity, the economic organization of the world, the decision making of the world, the processes on which we have always been part of in terms of making decisions about ourselves, our societies, our social structures, our governance. But that is a really a central question. I myself use AI, not just in terms of ChatGPT, but I also build AI software. For example, one project we're working on at this time is to build AI into architecture design. When you design buildings, and you know what, I was working on the problems, and architects love to do the design, but once the building is designed, there's a huge number of little processes that go through, putting the windows, putting the doors, putting the labels, putting the beds, the carpeting, So we're working on a building design, and it includes 800,000 elements. And after months of work and sending it to different architectural teams, there were still more than 10% mistakes in this huge design of a 23-story condominium. But we managed to use an LLM and an AI, and going through it, the AI was able to reduce most of the mistakes to get to 99.9% accuracy in terms of the building designs, each feature, each issue, each wall, each light, each fire extinguisher. So from an architecture's point of view, this is great. I can now get my architecture designs accurate. But from a human point of view, it displaces a lot of junior architects, people who do manual work, putting design work. And I think we see this in every area of our work. Currently, today, last year, every day, the jobs of junior people within the workforce are being made redundant by AI. And it's fine for someone who's really senior, really expert, but where is the career ladder going to be for young people if they are not allowed to start at the bottom of the ladder and work themselves up? And there's a big crisis among young people because there are fewer and fewer job opportunities. So I think this is one real critical issue that we're facing currently today. And the other big issue we're facing is that with this power, we see a huge shift and centralization of power within AI companies and other types of institutions that can now use AI at scale and can really concentrate and organize things in a very large scale without the participation of human beings. So you see centralization power in technology companies, in AI companies, in governments now using data, in any other process which is technology and data heavy. We see the centralization of power, and we foresee in 3 to 5 years' time, with the advance of robotics, then it is not just going to be centralization of power with regards to digital technologies, but actual human labor will happen. So rightly, there are ethical challenges that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. For me, the big challenge is that we live in a society of power structures and governance that does not put humanity at the center of our society, as Pope Leo has done really well to articulate. It rewards profit. It reports the concentration of power. It rewards the abuse of power. It rewards almost, stronger nation states that act as hegemons and imperialist states. It does not reward the underdog. So we live in a set of social structures that are, in a way, producing the whole counter narrative, the counter objectives of what Pope Leo has spoken about, and to put it in. And how do we face that? We as an ethical challenge, how do we then deal with it? When we personally use AI, we try to resolve it by, looking at how we can use this AI for better social outcomes. So how can we have better, more investigative reporting? How can we use AI to find fake news? Or how we can use AI to actually improve building design. But every step of the way, while we're using AI to improve something, we're also removing a human being from the process. And this is a real clear present day occurrence. It's not even something set in the future. On one hand, we can become more productive with technology. On the other hand, we are not paying for that productivity. We're not paying a human being. We're not paying our environmental costs, because there are huge environmental costs that are surfacing. We're not paying society for that improvement in productivity that we are gaining, and those improvements are really important. And because of competition, always the question is that we don't improve, then how do we support? So I think that to a certain extent, we need a combination of laws and regulations at one level. But how do we rethink society and the means of production and social production in this age where AI is going to play a very prominent role? So it's almost a question of political economy. How do you then reconfigure society and extract sufficient rewards for the society as a whole, rather than a minority? So we've already seen this, where there's huge concentration of wealth. The current systems essentially push wealth to the top, and I think that it's a big question. So I think that that the challenge is real. I think the church plays an important role. We need laws that promote a distribution of power. We need laws that promote a distribution of profits. And we need laws to manage AI. I think there is what has been served to us has been, there's a human in the loop. It's technology, there's AI. Some humans going to observe it and give a tick box and say, yes, green light it, go ahead with that. But that really is not a solution today, because AI is operating so fast, so quickly, at such a vast scale, that the human agency is dwarfed in the process, of which it's a totally different scale of operation. And the human is then intimidated to just, tick that box, give approval, press that button, without even reviewing what is actually, being implemented at scale. And AI is increasingly giving the powers and the agencies to act, because from a productive point of view, that seems to be the best way to go. So I think that the old dogma of having humans in the loop, a human, ticking that box, signing away on something, I don't think is going to be adequate. So I feel that the Catholic Church and other social organizations that rightly put humanity at the center of the discussion, we would need to then work with other communities of faith and other societies to craft a set of laws that do not allow the technology to only serve narrow interests. And we see this every day. We see this in the ongoing IPOs of SpaceX and Anthropic. We see this in the laws that are being developed in Malaysia and other countries. It is not going in this direction. So I think the question is, how do we then pull it back and make sure it serves humanity? So I'm happy to, I just thought I'd introduce the topic, but I'm happy to take questions and, engage in a further discussion around this issue. Thanks so much. Back to you, Stefan.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Prem. That was a great introduction too. Yes, look, is there anybody else, anybody that would like to pose a question right now before we move across to Bruce? Because Prem has spoken about some of the actual experience of working with AI and its impacts. So if there's anybody that'd like to jump in with a comment or a question, feel free right now. Just jump in, because I mightn't be able to see you on the screen. Yeah, but I will jump in too while others maybe are thinking, because one of the things that's been mentioned, excuse me, not going to solve the employment problem, but might help towards the income problem, is some kind of guaranteed income scheme. Do you have any thoughts about whether that sort of thing needs to be looked at?
Yes, I think that there needs to be a guarantee of income or a guarantee of, say, services. For example, housing or food or, education. So it can be, in cash or in kind. I think that in not only with AI, but the current economic system has pushed most of the resources to the top end and left large segments of population unable to gain enough resources for meaningful well-being. So I think definitely some of it. I think the challenge is one is that there's a very high level of indebtedness in countries. So if you look at the debt structures of countries, including the United States, debt is very high. So there's been huge accumulation of financial resources among an elite, and that has now become credit, and a lot of countries are now highly indebtedness. So where is the resources for such a universal basic income to come from? Some people have proposed a tax on AI companies and others. So to some extent, we may need to tax wealth and other ways to tax. But to what extent such taxes are amicable? So, there is a lot of, in a way, discrimination, or the mainstream thought discriminates against those who are less powerful and less wealthy. And people who are heavily taxed feel, privileged or overly heavily taxed. So we need to counter that narrative and come up with a new narrative saying that to share our wealth is the right thing to do, to share what we have, to provide for a wider society, regardless of our personal wealth. So we have a society where we champion property and property rights and personal income and personal wealth. We don't have a society that promotes solidarity and social well-being. So, Stefan, yes, I agree with you that we need a sort of universal basic income, but we need to think about how that would come about. Sorry, you're muted, Stefan.
Yep, sorry. Yeah, thanks, Prem. I see in the chat, Michael Cassidy's got a comment, or maybe you've actually addressed that question. Michael, do you want to make a comment?
No, thanks, Stefan. I'd just be interested in Prem's response to that question.
Yeah, so in Malaysia, we have started a discussion on a universal basic income. The government tried last year to provide a sum of money for everybody through our ID system, and it did that. And it has shown some interesting results. It was only 100 ringgit, which is about $25 US, one-off. But it did allow for a transfer of wealth, especially into rural, low-income communities. And they found that a lot of people who are wealthy did not even bother to, accept or to use that $25 US. So it was a single effort, but it showed that it does have some impact on social well-being.
Great. Thanks very much again, Prem. I think maybe now we might move to Bruce, and we can come back to further questions and discussion a bit later. So Bruce has had a challenge tonight with his camera. So this might be more of a podcast style talk by Bruce. But Bruce, I will post your photo on the screen so that we won't completely have a blank screen while we present. I think many of you here in this event tonight, you know Bruce as a specialist in Catholic social teaching for many years, and we're really pleased to have you again with us here tonight, Bruce. So over to you, and I'll project your photo if I can.
Thank you, Stefan. And my apologies for not being able to see you face to face. Well, I can see you, but you can't see me. So, look, I'm delighted to see so many here. And it's such an important encyclical for us, isn't it? This is Pope Leo's first encyclical, social encyclical, and it's nearly 42,000 words long. So it's almost the length of Fratelli Tutti when Pope Francis put out. So it's a big document, and but it's also a complex document. Fortunately, I think it's been written in English, so that it flows well, but the material is difficult because the complexity of the issues he's dealing with and the range of issues he's dealing with. I think the political context is very important for the encyclical. We have a war in Gaza, Ukraine. We have the United States with a president who's very unpredictable and doing great damage to the international economy with his policies, not just his own country, but globally, and seems to be in the process of wanting to dismantle NATO and the architecture of international relations. So this is a very uncertain and tenuous time, and it's good. It's right for people to be worried, and I think most people, as Premesh was saying there, that are quite worried about the implications for them. You think of all the bookkeepers in the world or in Australia, all the other people involved in aspects of law and so on, the white-collar jobs that will likely disappear. So it's a quite stressful time for period, wondering if their job's going to be there in a year or two. And the larger questions that Premesh was touching on were the questions of war and peace. If the AI systems can be as powerful as they indicate, then you could have robot wars. And you might have seen photos of a little army of robots in China doing all these fantastic movements and thinking these are going to get better and better. And already we hear that the United States has been using AI in its targeting in Iran.
Maximum volume.
So this is quite disturbing development, and people wonder where it is going to go. So particularly if it is no longer under human control. So if you leave the decision making to the machines, well, who programs the machines? How are they programmed? Do they capable of respecting human values? Machines don't have obviously souls, but they don't have a conscience. They don't have that ability to discern what is true, what is false, or they may be able to do it digitally, do a lot of that sort of sorting information, but to make moral judgments is not what a machine does, as far as we can see. So Pope Leo was taking these questions up as very urgent and pressing ones for him. We're lucky in a way that he's an American, because I think he can engage with the global public opinion, and particularly American public opinion, in a way that Pope Francis couldn't quite do. Francis did a lot of other things as well. And I was just looking through his Fratelli Tutti before coming in here, and I was thinking, Francis has said practically all that Leo has been saying in this new encyclical. And so there's a great continuity and overlap between the two, on particularly, as Premesh was saying, on the extraordinary inequality that has been developing in the world, and how the concentration of wealth has got to such an extreme, it is absolutely unprecedented historically, that a handful of people can have so much wealth. And we hear just in today's paper that Mr. Trump looks like being on the way with launching his new ventures to become a trillionaire. Well, we $1,000 billion. It's just astonishing. And what could concern Pope Francis and also Leo, who've been in developing countries, they've seen how confronting and offensive is the fact that some people have such immense wealth when so many others are really struggling just to put bread on the table, and lives are at risk. Francis, in his encyclical, saw it in the COVID, how where did the vaccines go? It went to the rich countries. Poor countries are very often left to fend for themselves. And that took a big toll in human life. So it just indicates the importance of this concentration of wealth, which brings power. It brings political power. And we can see that particularly in the United States, where the Trump administration is, with the MAGA movement, seems to have little regard for truth, for straight speaking. At a level, the critics are accusing of a degree of corruption, systemic corruption through the system that the Republicans have developed, right from the voting system, right through the management of public resources and the kickbacks people are getting along the way, particularly that the fact that is closely allied with the most wealthy people. Now, I'm not saying, and Francis is not saying, or Leo's not saying that all these people are corrupt. But he is saying that this is unsatisfactory. It will lead and has led to alienation of huge populations. We see it in Australia, the reaction against the political parties going to right-wing extremists. We see it in Europe and other countries as well, particularly in the United States. And we were always fairly confident that democracy in the United States was a firm rock on which to build the international order after the Second World War. And it was for a while. But after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was no longer a communist threat. And that meant that the powers of capital were able to move in areas that they couldn't do before. So that while living standards had been rising in the post-war period, and we had the Keynesian economics behind it, in came this new ideology of neoliberalism, which, strangely enough, Leo doesn't mention in his encyclical, though he talks about it in other ways. He doesn't use that word. He talks about the extreme inequality of power, of wealth, and the ideology behind it. But Francis had used the term neoliberalism frequently. And John Paul II had as well. John Paul II regarded the international system, even back in the 1990s, as like a war of the rich against the poor. That were his phrases. So this concern about the inequality of wealth, the growing inequality of wealth, has been a central plank of Vatican social thinking for a long time. And how do we get change this system? So the answer to the question is that it's going to be difficult. But he's saying that this is a central demand of the gospel. He wrote his evangelical, his earlier document, De Lexi Te, I Have Loved You, which was taking up what Pope Francis had written. It was almost his last will and testament. And Francis was very concerned that the church was getting very divided between people who were socially justed-minded and people who are more traditional and devotional. And he says there's a cleavage developed in the church. So that's why Francis got onto these two documents, his last two documents there. He didn't finish De Lexi Te, and Pope Leo did. And he worked it around looking at the history of the church and saying concern for the poorest, the most vulnerable people, the weak, the sick, is a central demand of the gospel. It's a central obligation of Christians, a central obligation of Catholics, all Christians, because Leo is talking not just to Catholics, but to all Christians, and indeed people of goodwill, whoever they are, even if they're unbelievers. So saying that, no, social justice is a central demand of the gospel. Yes, by all means have a devotion and piety and a sense of the nearness of God and his concern with us. And he's saying that what does the incarnation means? It means that God, through Jesus, has invested himself in human nature, in the human story, in our story. He's become one of us. And he can see from our perspective. And, when we get the last judgment scene, when did we see you hungry, thirsty, naked? And Jesus says, or God says in the judgment scene, whenever you saw this person who was sick or naked, that was me you saw. And what's it saying there? God identifies intensely with people who are in distress or trouble. And so what Leo is saying, and Francis before him saying, that the church needs to keep it together, our sense of devotion and experience of God in our private life, but also with social responsibility we have to others around us. What are the greatest, Jesus says, is asked, what are the greatest commandments? He said, love God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. And then later in another place, he talks the neighbor is a person not of your own kin or relationship, is the person, a foreigner, who's been beaten up, whom you dress the wounds of that man. You put him on a donkey and take him to a little hospital nearby or an inn so that he can recover. You pay for it. You come back and look at, see how he's getting on. You pay his bill. That's the neighbour. That's the neighbour. So it's really powerful sense that Leo is trying to re-establish and unite the church more solidly around that conviction. So he is breaking through with it, even though it's a difficult document. I've read it 3 or 4 times now, and I get a different sort of sense of it each time. But there was the Guardian newspaper had an article just recently about it by a lady called Awa Madawi. It's titled, "Thank God for Pope Leo. He's the leader our world desperately needs, even for unbelievers like me," she said. And she applauded Leo for standing up against Trump's policies against migrants and refugees, as well as against these wars in Iran and what's happening in Palestine. She said, Donald Trump has made cruelty cool and normalized greed and corruption. And tech titans, meanwhile, have lined up to kiss his ring. So that's one person's view, but I thought that struck a ring with me, a concern about the level of corruption that is going on in institutions we would once have trusted greatly, and looking, so what does Leo say? What is the answer? He said, the answer lies with each one of us. He said, we can't do, we're not supermen, we can't do, or superwomen, we can't go doing extraordinary things, but we can all do within our own circle. We can all act and have a voice and take action, whatever is appropriate in our circumstances, and to feel that this is the mission, this is our mission. And if all of us together can do this, stay informed, stay connected, and not as a Catholic enclave or a ghetto, but in dialogue with all other people who are feeling the similar things, other Christians particularly. But as Pope Francis was saying, yes, but we must extend this to the other faith traditions as well. And I think this is particularly so in Australia, because we're now in contact with people who are not just Christians, but Muslims and Hindus and people of all the other religions here. So it's a new type. We haven't had to do this before, particularly in Australia. We've been so, I think, isolated, and but now we do have to think of this. And what gives me heart is when Francis and Leo talk about that God loves everybody, whatever their religion, whatever their beliefs, whatever they've done, God loves everyone still, and is wanting to lead them to a richer and fuller life. And we do that through care for one another and for people who are out and down and out. So he goes through the usual things, highlighting the notion of the common good. We're all in this together. We'll all sink or swim together. And with climate change, making the situation much more urgent, on top of what's happening with the AI developments still ongoing. It's no wonder that people are uncertain. The last point I wanted to make was, remember when Pope Francis wrote on the encyclical, on the climate change, and he, in 2015 it was, he was very invested in this. He had top people, one of the world leaders helped launch it. Professor from the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact Research. And it gained world attention. And why did he do that? Because he wanted to press all the nations of the world to come together through the United Nations to vote for the Sustainable Development Goals. This was the great hope that we could turn the global situation around. So, and within a couple of years, it all fell apart. All the great efforts by economists and demographers and thousands of skilled people to develop the Sustainable Development Goals about how we can improve the living conditions of everybody throughout the world, and how we can have a more equitable world and a safer world. So Pope Francis was very involved in this process. He had teams of people working on it. And in the lead up to the meetings in the United Nations, you remember when he went to the address of the United Nations? You won't find a mention of the Sustainable Development Goals in the encyclical, the climate encyclical, because the United Nations hadn't voted on it yet. So he was doing this months before they went to vote, and as a way of building up public support. And he was on the phone ringing various leaders internationally and speaking, getting invited to the Vatican to have conferences and so on. So he built up the support right up to the very time He went to the United Nations, spoke to the United Nations, addressed the United Nations, and the whole world was watching this. He addressed the United States Senate, and then, but after his speech at the United Nations, they had lots of observers there, of course, but the representatives of all the countries were there. They left that meeting, went to another place, and voted through the Sustainable Development Goals. So he was very much involved in the orchestration about getting that through. So, but then, of course, when it all started to, the finance wasn't coming through. Think of it now. We think of the astonishing amounts of money that have been floating around in recent years, particularly after the COVID crisis, then the different financial crises we keep having, and now the AI boom that's going on. I don't know what is going to be outcome there. But there's been an enormous amount of money created for war. And what we're seeing now is a remilitarization of Europe in defense against Russia and the threat of new and wider wars breaking out. The United States has done it again. They've gone for another war of choice. You'd think they would have learned after Iraq. Don't go for create a war that you're not sure what's going to happen and could turn to disaster. They didn't learn. They've done it again. They've gone into Iran, and we're still trying to extract ourselves from that, but it's upset the whole world economy. And then we have the situation with Israel and Palestine. Again, there are sections in this encyclical which refer to these situations. They don't name them where they are, but it's obvious when Leo was talking about where children and women are being killed in great numbers with bombing. And there's been absolutely astonishingly extravagant destruction of cities, of Gaza, disproportionate responses. So, and again, Ukraine, about is just war still a possibility? He says we need to, earlier posts have been talking about this, we need to be much stricter about just war. And he says, yes, he must allow for the possibility of a war in defence in extreme circumstances. But the rhetoric of a just war has been used to justify so many recent wars that were not justified. And we think of Australia's involvement in some of these as well. So what I'm saying here is that there is a lot in this encyclical for us to think about. He's opening these questions up to say, look, this is a global problem, but it's very serious, because if we don't get this right, the consequences of many millions of people will be very severe. Think of climate change, rising sea levels, rising perhaps 10, 20 feet, all the major cities of the world under coastal cities flooded, people, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people displaced from the great river deltas, and where are they going to go? What is good? So this is the sort of frightful scenario that we face. It's I'm not being theatrical here. It's a very, and I hate to say it, but it's a very critical time for us to get these things right again. So, everybody, I'm sorry I've gone a little bit longer than I thought, so I should stop.
Great. Thanks very much, Bruce. Yes, you certainly have.
Thank you for listening. Yes.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, look, yeah, you really have taken us right through so many different aspects of the encyclical. And I think there's a lot not just to digest, but also to reflect on further. But before we get into the chat, I think let's hand over to Stuart now, who has some, not sure if I should call them novel reflections, but certainly reflections I haven't heard anywhere else up to now, about Leo's framing of the encyclical in biblical terms. Over to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Stefan, and good evening, everyone. Thanks very much, Prem and Bruce, for those two contributions. I found them really stimulating. But my particular angle, as Stefan has said, comes from the world of biblical scholarship. I'm not sure that I'm any kind of expert on the book of Nehemiah, but I've probably done more research on that in the last couple of weeks than many people have done in their lifetimes. I tend to focus more on New Testament subjects, but I suppose I came to pick up Magnifica Humanitas when it came out, wanting to see how the new Pope would use Scripture in his first encyclical. Because we can't take for granted that Scripture will be used well in Vatican documents. It can be used in fairly superficial ways sometimes, almost proof texting. Certainly in older documents that was the case. It was interesting actually to look back at Rerum Novarum, Leo XIII's great social encyclical, and Leo XIII's use of Scripture, which was a smattering of proof texts really used to support theological and philosophical conclusions come to on the basis of Thomistic philosophy. When we come to Leo XIV and Magnifica Humanitas, we see a completely different approach, and one which delighted me as a biblical scholar, and that was to see these powerful scriptural images used as the very frame or the lens, whichever analogy you'd like, through which to understand the dense material of the encyclical that Bruce has referred to. And I think the readability of the encyclical is enhanced by Leo putting that frame around the encyclical. And when I say it's a frame, he really does bookend the encyclical. Right at the beginning, he introduces the two great images of the Tower of Babel, a negative image, and the image more positive of the building or rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem under Nehemiah in the mid-5th century BCE. And then he comes back to those images right at the very end of the encyclical as well. They're referred to in between as well, but I just thought it was so powerful the way in which the whole long document is bookended by these two great biblical images. Now, of course, he doesn't give an intro to the Bible, much less exegete those images. But I think what he's inviting us to do as readers is to go and inform ourselves a little bit more about the story of Babel in the book of Genesis and about Nehemiah. And so I just, over a couple of minutes, I'd just like to say something about those images. It must have been a challenge to find biblical texts that could speak to the topic of artificial intelligence. You couldn't really get two things that were further apart. These ancient texts that come from cultures with such limited technology compared to ours. And yet Leo has been able to identify these texts, I think because they are instances of the use of technology in the biblical world. The kind of primary instance of technology, which after all is just the use of tools, is in the field of building, of construction. And I think that's probably what's drawn the Pope's eye to those instances in the Bible where we're talking about the use of tools, building and construction. And so he uses that as a kind of analogous field for us to think about the technology of our era, which is digital technology and artificial intelligence. Of course, we should also remember that the encyclical is not actually about artificial intelligence, and I'm sure Bruce would back me up on this. It's a social justice encyclical. It's an encyclical which is about safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. And hence we get those references to slavery, to war, to climate change, all those things that Bruce was talking about. It's not just about AI at all. And so it must have been tempting for the Pope to pick out some of the classical justice texts from the prophets or the Gospels. Bruce mentioned Matthew 25, the Last Judgment. But I think the Pope has taken a more sophisticated route by taking these images of Babel and Nehemiah. Quick word on each of those two images. Babel from Genesis chapter 11. It's culturally well known. We've all kind of heard of the Tower of Babel, but possibly we know the details of the story less well, and it's worth going back to that text and looking at its context in the book of Genesis. It's the last of three of the prehistoric tales in Genesis. After the Tower of Babel, we get Abraham and Sarah and the whole story of the people of Israel. The Tower of Babel is the last of these prehistoric tales, and in particular of the three divine interventions in human affairs that are each prompted by some form of human hubris, and usually in the form of an attempt to seize something of the divine life. And we think about the creation stories and the tempting of Adam and Eve by the serpent, who says, "Eat of the tree of knowledge and you will be as gods, knowing good and evil." And then we get a slightly stranger story in Genesis chapter 6, which is about this intercourse between the sons of God, some kind of celestial beings, and human women, and the creation of this race of giants who have unusually long lifespans. And God takes that as the prompt for the Great Flood. So in each of these stories, including Babel, we've got this attempt on the part of human beings to seize something of the divine life, to try and go beyond their humanity in a way which is not only impermissible, but actually does them damage. And we see that very much in the Babel story, where instead of following the divine command to fill the earth, to move horizontally, we have people who stay in one place and want to build a vertical tower to touch heaven and conquer heaven. And so Leo sees this as a story about attempting to bypass what is genuinely human, and therefore doing something dehumanizing, where people become a means to a technological end. That's really what the Pope uses Babel for. The book of Nehemiah, I was really surprised to see Nehemiah included in the encyclical. It's not a book which is well known to Catholics, or probably to most mainstream Christians. Those of us who are Catholics or who worship in churches that follow the 3-year lectionary cycle, we only get Nehemiah once on a Sunday every 3 years. And it's not the story from Nehemiah about the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. It's about something else later in the book, the reading of the law. So it's not a book that's well known to Catholics, much more well known to Jewish people, because in the Jewish Bible, Nehemiah is the last book. So it comes in that very prominent last place in the Jewish Bible. And that's appropriate because it's a book which is talking about the re-establishment of Jerusalem and its temple after the Babylonian exile. We're talking about this is the mid-5th century BCE here. So well known to Jews, not so well known to Christians, but a book which is really about the rebuilding of a home. And I think the main difference between the project of building the Tower of Babel and the project of rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem in Nehemiah is that Nehemiah brings his project first to prayer, and he places the whole enterprise within rather than outside of or opposed to God's plan, which is what we see in Babel. And so the Pope presents the story of Nehemiah as a positive image of collective and individual responsibility. And there are elements of both in the story of Nehemiah, and there's definitely elements of both of that in the encyclical. The Pope says, yes, there are things which governments and corporations must do in terms of regulation, Prem talked about, but there are also the things which Bruce mentioned, which each of us as individuals are called to do, and the story of Nehemiah blends those two elements of the institutional and the collective together with the individual really well. A final word though, the image in Nehemiah is about rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. The temple has already been rebuilt at this stage, by the way, but the walls of the city have not been rebuilt, and therefore no one wants to live there because it's not defensible, it's not safe. So walls are a good thing, but they're also ambiguous. They're always ambiguous because walls can create a protected zone, a home, somewhere that's safe to live in, but they also exclude those who are outside. And the book of Nehemiah, if we read it honestly, does contain some streaks of exclusion. And it's not that the ancient people of Israel were the only people in the ancient world that wanted to exclude foreigners. They certainly weren't. But they returned to the Holy Land in chaotic circumstances and in circumstances where they were trying to reestablish the life of the people. And so there is an element of exclusion of foreigners in the book of Nehemiah. And so that wall has that ambiguous symbolism. And I think that Leo is well aware of that limitation that lurks in the image of Nehemiah. And so, again, both at the beginning of the encyclical and right at the end, Leo brings in a third biblical image, which I think is really important, and that's the image of the New Jerusalem from chapter 21 of the book of Revelation. Because there we have a city built by God and given as a gift. And the New Jerusalem in Revelation does have walls. It has enormous walls and it has enormous gates, but we're told that the gates of the New Jerusalem are never closed. I think that image from Revelation really neatly kind of brings together the use of scripture in the encyclical, because we've got Genesis, the beginning of the Bible. We've got Nehemiah, which is the end of the Jewish Bible, even if it doesn't come in the last place of the Old Testament for Christians. And then we've got the end of the Christian Bible as well. And I don't know whether Leo intended to have that structure, but it really struck me, and it has a satisfying symmetry. And I think that final image of the New Jerusalem is not only one which is full of hope, but it also reminds us that the construction of the city of God is not ultimately just up to us. It's not all up to us. We're called to do what we can in our time. And he had that wonderful quote from Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, which has struck many people, which goes to that point. But he reminds us that it's not just about our own efforts, but ultimately the city of God is one which is a gift. Hopefully I haven't gone too far over time there, Stefan.
Oh, no, that was
back over
great.
to you.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Stuart. Yeah, that was great. Wow, that makes three very different reflections arising from Pope Leo's encyclical. So, yeah, I think we've had a great range of presentations. So, thanks very much for that, Stuart. Yeah, a lot to unpack in that as well. Yes, so now it's over to the rest of us. I see there's quite a number of comments already in the chat. I'm not sure who to pick. If anybody'd like to, just open up your microphone now. Now's the time when you can do it, and either jump in with a comment or a question.
Stefan, if I could start, I'd be happy to.
Right.
Leo certainly spoke about...
Can you introduce yourself, just so we can...
Oh, sorry, it's Peter Johnston.
Okay, Peter, yep.
Peter Johnston. Leo certainly spoke at length, but all was in the context, I thought, in the time of artificial intelligence. And I was particularly impressed that he got to the chase in recognising the geopolitical implications of artificial intelligence, recognising the danger of autonomy that is very real with artificial intelligence, particularly as been mentioned by a couple of the speakers, of the absence of conscience and values in decision making. But what Leo identified, which seems to me to be very clear, is the need for some form of international agreement on the regulation of the development of artificial intelligence. Now, that raises the question, of course, is what chance in the real world is there of achieving such agreement? It may be that Premesh is the best person to address this. Will the threat of autonomous artificial intelligence be sufficient to bring the world together to deal particularly with rogue states? And in talking about rogue states, of course, there's one powerful country in the world today that we wouldn't previously have considered a rogue state that might be the most difficult to bring to any agreement on artificial intelligence. Trump having already indicated that he wants his mates in the artificial intelligence area to pretty much go for broke. I guess my question really is there a possible leadership role for Leo in trying to achieve this international agreement? Because it would seem to me that on any analysis, we're in big trouble without that international agreement.
Thanks very much, Peter. Yeah, unfortunately, Prem has had to leave for another appointment, so he won't be able to respond. But Bruce or Stuart, would you like to pick up anything that Peter has said?
I could just come in there. It's Bruce Duncan here again. At the launch of the encyclical, Pope Francis invited Christopher Olah, who's the head of Anthropic. If I got the Anthropic, is it?
Yeah,
Yes. Yep.
And one of the big IT things. So he's been one of the leading people in designing and building these systems. So I think he's. Did I see a news clip tonight that now just before that, Chris is an atheist. So it just emphasizes the point that this is not just a Catholic issue, but it's for all people in the world. It's become a really dominant issue. And the point I was going to make is that I think I just saw it today or last night that the leaders of these or some of the big technological companies are trying to realize that something along the lines that Peter was suggesting, sort of how do we control these and what does it all mean? And we can't just let it all take its own way. So there has to be some sort of framework, legal and ethical framework put around this. So, Peter, I don't know whether how far that has got yet, but Ola is definitely, he's regarded as the sole man for these technological developments. So I don't know how much support he would get from the others, but I think there's enough public support around them now and pressure on governments to ensure that something is done. But you're quite right. That's the next step that has to be put in place somehow.
Mm.
I see there's a couple more comments in the chat. Kevin Wright and also Robert Gascoigne. Would either of you like to speak to your comments?
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Robert Gascoigne here. And thanks very much to our speakers for their very clear and helpful presentations. Yes, I just put in the chat that the Oxford University Ramsay Centre for Science and Religion has within it a theology and AI collaboration. And this particular team has developed an oath for the use of AI. So intending to guide engineers in their use of AI. I've put the link in the chat. It's very interesting to follow up. as an oath with a number of parts to it, which I think would be very helpful ethical guidance for people engaged with AI, particularly for people with Christian or other religious formation who want to tackle the ethical implications of using AI. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Robert. There's another person there, Veronica Brogden. I don't know, would you like to jump in as well? I don't mean to cut off, who else did I mention? Kevin, either Kevin or Veronica, if either of you like to jump in, now's the time.
Yeah, so I'm a secondary teacher in Western Sydney, and yeah, a lot of this is really interesting in working with youth around all of this. And I did see the comment about Catholic schools, and I hope that we are engaging with our students in a way that does bring the whole ethical issue into our teaching. But even before the encyclical, Pope Leo spoke at the US conference for the youth. And I just placed in there a clip of how the youth were asking him questions, and it was all over the internet, and in terms of the Q&A was online, and he really did use that platform to show the good of the internet and the good and how it can connect. But he also did make some very clear connections to the Beatitudes and seeing the other behind the AI, and who is the person behind the avatar when you're actually playing a game and things like that, as opposed to it's just another object on the screen, so to speak. So to actually see beyond what you see in front of you to the person who's actually behind the screen that you're playing. So I just put that in there because I have found that quite useful with my students. So
Thank you, Veronica. Great. I think there's a lot to be done at the level of education, not just of young people, but of us older people as well. Yeah, Kevin, did you want to jump in there? Actually, Kevin's point is on a similar thing. We need to refocus on values education, and Catholic schools need to refocus on these as well. So yeah, if you're there, still there, Kevin, feel free to jump in. Or is there anyone else that would like to make a comment? Or either you, Stuart, or Bruce, again? Yes, we have been going for a good while now, 80 minutes or so. So we've probably got to look at winding up soon. I'm going down to the bottom there. Kimball, yeah, I see you've got a comment there.
Yeah, it's Kim Chen.
Yep,
Stefan from Tasmania and from the parish where Michael Tate was presided. So
fantastic.
Yeah, so the thing that struck me about the encyclical is it being fundamental that these issues be approached through Catholic social teaching. And it sent me back to read something that Michael Cherney had written in 2022. And he said, teaching and spreading the Church's social teaching belongs in an essential way to the Christian message. It's not a marginal action, which is added as a second step, as a field of practical application following a corpus of dogmatic truths. On the contrary, it is located at the very heart of the evangelical proclamation. It is part of the Church's ministry as a service to the Word and to humankind, because only in the mystery of the incarnate Word does the mystery of man take on light. And he goes on to say, but rather as its interior and intrinsic reality. And that's what struck me about the encyclical, was bringing social teaching being I guess, in this instance, the only prism or magnifying glass through which you look at social issues. And I just don't think that our church, especially some parts of the hierarchy, really embrace that as perhaps they should. And that's perhaps a part of the conversation we ought to explore when we have opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, there is definitely space, need, not just for that space of dialogue at different levels. Ray, I see you've got a comment as well. Ray Timmerman, would you like to speak about that?
Yeah, it's Ray Timmerman here in Winnipeg, Canada. It seems to me that if we're going to follow the Catholic social teaching development route, that's really good and essential, but will be too little too late. And that almost we need to somehow bring about a reduction in the development or the speed of development in AI through economic almost penalty tax on the wealth that it generates to make sure that spreads. And the moment people who are invested in it see that they can't just make piles of money and keep it all to themselves, they might lose some interest, thereby giving us a chance and the time to actually do the things that really need to do. I know that's a bit of a weird approach, but it's just moving so rapidly that I don't see how any legislation can possibly keep up. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ray. What must be early in the morning for you over in Winnipeg, I think. But thanks for joining us. And yes, a very big issue there on how do we keep up. Yeah, look, we have been going more than 80 minutes now. If there's anybody would like to make a last comment, otherwise maybe I'll just ask Stuart or Bruce if you'd like to just say a couple of final words before we close.
Yes, thank you. It's Bruce here again. My apologies for my black screen. I'll get it sorted out later somehow. And thank you for coming along and the questions. The issues are so large and so serious that it's difficult to deal with, and to know, we're only little people. What can we do? But I think this is a conversation we urgently need to have, and to develop further with our family. We don't want to frighten people with it, but it is a very serious situation. So I thank God that Pope Leo was following so clearly along the lines that Francis established, and getting such attention throughout the world to these issues. Just his visit to Spain at the moment is getting world attention, and he's saying these same sort of things. So I think something is happening, and he says, in the encyclical there, the choice, there's not a choice between faith and social justice. He says it is the teaching of the church that the social obligation is part of the doctrine of the church. He uses the doctrine of the church to say it's not an optional extra. It is right at the center of things. So hopefully that'll be a way of bringing a bit of healing to the church and making us more effective in our witness.
Thanks very much, Bruce. Stuart, would you like to make any last comments?
Thanks, Stefan. Very, very quickly. Look, I think again, what the encyclical reminds us is that, particularly those of us who are in the Catholic Christian tradition, but the Christian tradition and traditions of faith more generally, we have something which is unique and precious to add to this conversation, and I think which can give us hope as well. And that's not just the biblical texts, but the whole tradition of the church, and particularly the last 120 odd years of social justice teaching that Bruce has talked about. So I think that's something for us to hang on to when we feel, as if this is a problem which is beyond us. We have resources to enable us to reflect, to see, judge and act, to come back to where you started, Stefan. And there's a lot of, all of that is put before us in the encyclical. I think not only is there a great use of scripture, but there's a terrific summary of the church's social teaching since Rerum Novarum there over a number of pages. You don't even have to go further than this encyclical to get a course in the church's social teaching. It's really terrific as a resource for us.
Thanks very much, Stuart. And I'd just like to thank you, Bruce, and also Prem for this great presentation that you've given, an introduction to the encyclical, a kind of a reading guide from 3 different angles. We're just at the start of this thing. I'm not sure what the action is going to be, but at this stage, we'll probably have to leave it up to each individual to figure out our own individual action. But thanks very much to everybody for joining us, and we look forward to being with you again in the future. Next month, we'll have a very interesting one. A friend from Japan, who's been working with the Catholic community in Nagasaki, where they had the tragic experience of the nuclear bomb on the 15th of August, 1945. But I'll be sending more information out about that soon. But meanwhile, thanks very much for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you.
See you all. Bye-bye.